Hi, and welcome back. We're going to revisit Dell and their first title, Popular Comics. Dell is reprinting some of the heavyweights of the comic strip world, including Little Orphan Annie and Dick Tracy. Now, we're not going to talk about Little Orphan Annie today, but we are going to start with Dick Tracy. When we meet up with Dick Tracy at the beginning of this year, we're reading the Dick Tracy Sunday pages from the previous March. Tracy, Tess, and Junior are about to leave for a much-needed vacation in Florida when Tracy's plans are canceled by a call from Chief Brandon. Addie Gawthorne, the Broadway gambler, chiseler, and racketeer, has been found murdered. The bellboy who waited on Gawthorne that night is murdered next. The prime suspect is Lips Manless. Gawthorne had lost $300,000 to Manless in a high-stakes poker game and then welched on him. Complicating the investigation is figuring out how Gawthorne was killed. Doesn't really matter how that's pronounced. It's not important to the overall plot, really. Once they figure that out, it leads to the real killer, Anthil Jones, but Jones wasn't working alone. Papers in his apartment suggest that he had teamed up with Lips Manless to arrange the killing. By now, Manless knows the cops are onto him and rigs the elevator in his building to explode. To make sure no one else uses the elevator first, Manless has his valet positioned at the elevator to tell everyone else to use the stairs. The valet knows the elevator is trapped, but only squeals when Tracy insists the valet rides up with him. Tracy, along with plenty of backup, corner Manless in his office and captures him after the reflection in the transom reveals where Manless is hiding. The trouble is, Tracy doesn't think Jones's papers is enough evidence and he can't get a confession out of Manless. So he does something extremely unorthodox. He decides he's going to reform Manless by getting him a normal job under a different identity, Bob Honor. Tracy pulls in a favor, a big favor, and gets Bob a job guarding a warehouse with over $200 million worth of merchandise inside. Tracy doesn't take no small gambles. The mob wants to teach Manless a lesson, though, so they try to burn the warehouse down, and when that fails, rob it. Tracy and Manless are inside waiting to ambush the robbers, but Tracy is knocked out, and it appears Manless did it. But he was kidnapped by his old gang, including his ex-girlfriend, Mimi. Bob Honor is still honorable now, though he admits that he might not have stayed straight had his gang not turned on him and cut him in fair. So he captures the robbers single-handedly, but is badly burned when the truck he is transporting the robbers in catches on fire. Mimi is burned too, so badly on her hand that it has to be amputated. The amputation turns her into one of Dick Tracy's grotesque Rose Gallery members, even though it's just her hand that's grotesque. And now a manhunt is on for Mimi, the last member of the gang to escape. Her hideout is revealed by Bob's old valet, who Junior has stayed in touch with all this time. And the hideout is a yacht owned by a Japanese dope and alien smuggler named Toyi. Tracy and his pal Pat Patton, who hasn't been very active in the story to date, board the yacht for a look around, but Mimi talks Toyi into taking Tracy and Patton out to sea and dumping them overboard. They are rescued by the Coast Guard in the nick of time before drowning. Later, Honor leads Tracy to Toyi's dockfront hideout, where Mimi is captured, but Toyi escapes sewn into a dead fish by his men and smuggled back to his yacht. But Tracy figures this out, pursues, and Toyi commits suicide with a poison pill when he realizes he's cornered. But meanwhile, Pat is nearly stabbed to death by a Chinese worker in Toyi's employ who is loyal to Mimi. Mimi is free once more and goes after Bob Honor for revenge, drugging him and getting him to marry her. Before Tracy can find Bob, thanks to his first wife, Kitty, Mimi appears to have turned Bob, or rather Lips Manless, against Tracy, and Manless dumps Tracy through a trap door. But this was to save Tracy from Mimi's gunman, who Honor captures himself before freeing Tracy. Mimi, meanwhile, has taken poison like Toyi did, rather than be captured. At the year's end, Tracy's already in the hunt for the Purple Cross Gang. The Bob Honor story was difficult at times to follow without the dailies. While Gould did a good job of never advancing the story too far during the week, just reading the Sunday pages, you'd sometimes be left scratching your head wondering, well, how did Tracy find that out? Oh, that's right, I missed that clue. The story could easily have seemed ridiculously naive to the modern reader, even in its day, but what it was is a modern morality play. Morality plays with their protagonist tempted by angels and devils goes back to the Middle Ages and survives in cartoons to this day as little angels and devils that briefly appear over your character's shoulders and represent the two sides of their subconscious. Here, Tracy is Manless's angel and Mimi is his devil, each trying to pull him in different directions. It is not the first literate story in comics. Several features have borrowed from The Prince and the Pauper already, and there have also been literary adaptations that I haven't been discussing, like Ivanhoe, Haggard's novel She, and The Three Musketeers. The adaptations are, without exception, not very good and mostly exist as page filler, which is why we haven't talked about them. But the important point here is that high literature and comic books were never seen from the start as necessarily separate things, and morality itself will figure strongly in some of the early Superman stories, so we'll come back and talk about this subject again. What's important here is that Chester Gould, at this point in writing Dick Tracy, is getting better at writing more elaborate stories and more meaningful stories. And Dick Tracy is growing more popular over time because of that. And it's reflected in the page count here too. While Dick Tracy commands 4 pages in a row in popular comics, other features are getting considerably less or not consecutive pages. Gasoline Alley, for example, only has 3 pages, sometimes in order and sometimes spread throughout the issues. Speaking of Gasoline Alley, by 1917, Frank King had already created the comic strips Bobby Make-Believe, Here Comes Motorcycle Mike, and Hi Hopper for the Chicago Tribune, none of which you've ever heard of. But in 1917, he was working on a new strip called The Rectangle that would come to feature recurring characters Bill, Doc, Avery, and Walter Wallet, who talked as they worked on cars in the alley behind their houses, which became known as Gasoline Alley. By 1918, Gasoline Alley had become a spin-off strip of its own, largely focused on Walt. Gasoline Alley might have fizzled out by the 1930s, but something remarkable happened in the strip on February 14th, 1921, when Walt found a baby in a basket on his doorstep. He adopted the baby, and from that moment on, little baby Skeezix would grow in real time as the comic strip progressed. At times, the strip was funny. At times, it was adventurous, or skirted around the possibility of adventure. I'll come back to explaining that. At other times, you would just be watching Skeezix's life unfold. It was like the comic strip version of The Truman Show, and people loved it. In 1916, King was making $5,000 a year. By 1922, he was making $22,000 a year. By the 1930s, Gasoline Alley was in over 300 newspapers, was being read by 27 million people, and merchandising, there's that word again, had made Frank King a millionaire. By the 1930s, Skeezix is a young man, a teenager really, and has left home and the familiar family elements of the daily strip for an adventure with Avery. They're touring the countryside by car. Well, Avery, his Uncle Avery, tries to peddle his home-brewed elixirs and drags his exasperated wife Emily along. On the first page reprinted in 1937, Avery and Skeezix have been sidelined by a prospector with a map to a silver mine. But Emily sees right through this as a fellow scam artist. There are other adventures on this trip, like Skeezix getting accidentally dragged behind Avery's trailer and Avery thrown in jail for peddling without a license. The road trip lasted most of the summer, but eventually they returned home, barely, their car breaking down the whole way. Skeezix's adventure back home is blowing all of his pay for the summer on soda for all of his friends, and then he's off again, being accepted at a prep school in a different town. Skeezix's supporting cast becomes different at this point. His roommate is a nerd, Sissy Bly, neither of whom initially like each other, and his friend on campus is an older friend of his called Brick. The reason he wanted this particular prep school is because the girl he likes, Trixie, goes to a girls' school just 8 miles away. This whole time, there's been no real adventure. Even the almost an adventure of prospecting for silver was thwarted by Emily. This is pure slice of life coming of age storytelling. It feels honest and heartwarming, and that is a formula that has sustained this title to make it to the longest running current strip in the United States and the second longest running strip of all time in the United States after the Katzenjammer Kids. It spawned a radio series that ran for 18 years through the 30s and 40s, plus 2 theatrically released movies in the 1950s. Gasoline Alley was not the first slice of life soap opera comic strip. That would be the Gumps. The Gumps, also featured in popular comics, began in 1917 following Andy and Min Gump and their extended family. One of the strip's first innovations was having a continuous storyline that advanced from day to day. Before this, all strips, including Gasoline Alley, were self-contained standalone stories, even if you read the same characters from day to day. Like Gasoline Alley and Thimble Theater, the Gumps didn't start out that way. It began as a gag-a-day strip that slowly evolved into longer stories. Through the 1920s, the Gumps was still an innovative strip, featuring the first death of a major comic strip character. And innovation paired with likable, relatable characters is what made the Gumps ridiculously popular. In 1935, Gumps creator Sidney Smith had just signed a record-breaking contract of $150,000 a year, money I can only dream about making here in 2025 today, when he crashed his brand new Rolls Royce and died. Is the moral of this story that I'm better off poor? Now, the strips being reprinted in popular comics at the beginning of 1937 were all from 1935 and 1936, and these pages in particular start in 1935, the year he died. But I don't know when exactly in 1935, so I can't say for sure if these were written by Smith or a successor, Gus Edson. They were signed Sidney Smith, but that doesn't really mean much in comic strips or comic books. You remember that Bob Kane's signature was on every Batman comic book he didn't draw for years. But I do know that by this time, the Gumps was becoming more of a follower than a leader, and it was following the trend of adventure strips that was now very popular. This adventure centers around the current star of the strip, the son of Andy and Min Gump, Chester. Chester, like a lot of child heroes in comic strips, inexplicably is able to get permission from his parents to go on all kinds of dangerous trips, like this pole-to-pole flight with the intrepid explorer Captain Duquette. Rusty, the engineer on the crew, has turned on them in the Arctic and is doubling back to their plane with their food, intent on claiming the $50,000 pole-to-pole prize money for himself. Hunger and intense cold drives Lieutenant Johnson temporarily insane, and one of the crew suggests shooting Johnson and putting him out of his misery, but Chester stands up for him, reminding Captain Duquette that they have to obey the laws of humanity. Philosophical stuff. Kudlow, the Eskimo, stops Rusty from getting away with the plane, though Kudlow sacrificed his life to make it happen. That might seem progressive, having an Eskimo hero, but this is 1935, and our narrator tells us that Kudlow's skin was brown, but he was white clear through. No sooner do they fly away from the North Pole than Chester's back home with his friends, building igloos or ice skating with his father. With the adventure over, there is no story arc anymore, and the strip occasionally relapses back to its gag-a-day roots. Like here, where Andy, not being able to fix a door, is upset because Min is able to walk up and do it easily. Huh? The Gumps, once on top of the world, just like Chester on top of the world. It spawned 50 animated shorts and nearly as many live-action shorts in the 1920s, and a radio drama for 4 years in the 1930s. But now in 1937, the problem with the Gump seems to be that it does well on adventure strips, but then it doesn't know how to carry over story arcs like the way Gasoline Alley does. And so it doesn't know what to do with the characters during their downtime. And it really is hurt by that. And we can tell that by the unpopularity of the Gumps at this time already. It's only getting 2 pages an issue in popular comics. reflecting that decline. And we know that the Gumps will be gone from comic sections forever by 1960. Now, we're not going to be gone, so we're going to be back again soon with another installment, and I hope that you enjoy it and that you get a chance to read the comments section, leave some comments for me, and also like this and subscribe if you haven't already, and consider donating to the Patreon. So thank you for your time, and bye again.